Ladies and gentlemen, I need everyone to gather around, particularly if you are of foundational Black American lineage. If we, as descendants of slavery in the United States, do not start gatekeeping our culture, history, and our lineage, even our economics, as of today, what is going to happen is that down the line, our history is going to be so rewritten that never mind it being whitewashed, they're just going to wash us out completely of it. And when I read this article that I'm going to read today, you will understand why we need to get on code. Let's get into this, shall we? Hello, good afternoon. It's your girl. You know who I am by now. I've been doing this 5 years come August. So I had to read and talk about this to every one of my subs, my listeners. This really has me vexed. It has me vexed. So I was on Lipstick Alley and I happened to read the second post on the blog just to see what's going on in the world today, so I can basically, what articles or what news can I share with the people on YouTube, on Spreaker. So I happened up literally on this. It's the second one of the trending threads, and it reads, CNN credits Jamaicans for hip-hop, house, and rap. Now, before I begin, I want to say that I was supposed to do a video on the true origins of hip-hop for Black Music Month. I didn't get time to do it because I've been really, really busy working on personal things at home and for me because of me being backlogged due to my insomnia. However, coming off of this, after a couple of days of Black Music Month ending, I think that this needs to be talked about. Now, even though they posted this on June 26th, I just found it out today. And because I'm past the 2-minute mark, if I want to, I can curse. But I'm not going to. So this is what it reads. It reads from CNN, Beyonce's Break My Soul pays homage to house music's Black queer roots. So I want everybody to listen closely because I'm going to emphasize the part when it talks about Jamaicans and hip-hop, house, and rap music. Beyonce has hailed this summer's liberation anthem with the release of the new single, Break My Soul, and its Black queer roots are undeniable. The song's release earlier this week comes at the intersection of Juneteenth Pride Month and Black Music Month. A house track at its core, the song samples Robin S.'s 1993 hit Show Me Love and vocals from Black queer bounce icon Big Freedia. House music is a form of electronic dance music developed in the early 1980s in Chicago that quickly spread throughout underground music scenes in cities like New York, Detroit, and London. Mainstream music in 1989, Queen Latifah released a rap house song, Come Into My House. Throughout the 1990s, Crystal Waters' Gypsy Woman, She's Homeless saw pop success as well as C&C Music Factory's blend of hip-hop and house, which produced classics such as Gonna Make You Sweat and Just a Touch of Love. Since the mid-2000s, Grammy-winning producer Kay Trinata has partnered with hip-hop and R&B artists. Lesser known about house music is its roots in Black queer culture. It has been the soundtrack of Black queer nightlife as a liberating sanctuary. The lyrics, release your anger, release your mind, release your job, release the tide, release your trade, release your stress, release your love, forget the rest. Sang by Big Freedia, who was also featured in Beyonce's 2016 song Formation, encouraged listeners to free themselves from the stresses of everyday life and instead embrace love and joy. Miami University musicology professor Tammy Carnodle said clubs provided a space for young Black and Latinx queer, I'm sorry, forgive me for what I'm going to say, Latino queer communities, because the word Latinx, as a person who is a descendant of Latinos myself, I can't stand that word. I'm sorry. I gotta say it. And if my grandma, abuelita, was here, she would basically be like, oh, hell no. What the hell is a Latinx? What the hell? I had to say that. Queer communities to let go of negativity. She equated nights at these clubs to a spiritual, judgment-free experience in which house music's hard-hitting bass, layered polyrhythms, and beat drops created a sense of ecstasy among listeners. In terms of Black queer joy, these particular spaces and house music serves as the kind of equivalent of church and gospel music, Carnodle said. These spaces were spaces that helped individuals reclaim their humanity from not just white majority spaces that looked upon them in certain ways, but also the Black community that distanced them. And that's very important because I'm going to get to that. History of house. Known for its upbeat tempo, repetitive 4/4 rhythms, and sample vocals, house music is said to have gotten its name from an underground gay club in Chicago known as The Warehouse, a member-only club that opens in the late 1970s. Clubs like The Warehouse provided a safe space for queer communities of color who were excluded from white gay clubs while facing homophobia within their own racial and ethnic communities. DJs like Frankie Knuckles, known as the godfather of house music, created an electrifying experience for the most Black and Latin queer audiences who were able to let loose on the dance floor and embrace community. Knuckles, who came from New York to Chicago, exemplifies house music as a cultural dialogue between the two cities. In New York City, dance clubs like the Paradise Garage and the Loft preceded the Warehouse, providing a safe nightlife haven for queer youth of color to dance to the sound curated by DJs like Larry Levin. Now, I've heard of him. And it also reads what differentiated clubs like the Warehouse from traditional nightclubs is that they were alcohol-free zones, instead serving juice and fruits. I would have liked that club. Carnodle said audiences were not under the influence of drugs and alcohol. Rather, they were intoxicated by the music. House pioneer Jesse Saunders said house music really came to fruition as a genre in the early 1980s as more clubs like the Warehouse began to open and more straight Chicago youth from the South Side and other regions began coming to these spaces, sharing the music with the outside world. Saunders said, even in a city as segregated as Chicago, house music clubs were spaces of unity that brought people of various racial backgrounds and sexual orientations together as the genre grew more popular. House music is universal. It's the shared love of freedom, wanting to dance and not be crucified for it, Saunders said. House music is a culture and is one of acceptance. It breeds harmony. So, this is the part that's going to get everybody upset. In erased history, relative to genres like rap and hip-hop, Carnodle said house music is often omitted from conversations about Black DJ culture due to homophobia. Though house, rap, and hip-hop were all birthed from Jamaican dance hall and sound system culture coming to America, rap and hip-hop became more palatable and revered based on how they presented images of Black masculinity that were deemed acceptable. She added, I'm going to read this one more time again. Relative to genres like rap and hip-hop, Carnodle said house music is often omitted from conversations about black DJ culture due to homophobia. Though house, rap, and hip-hop were all birthed from Jamaican dancehall and sound system culture coming to America, rap and hip-hop became more palatable and revered based on how they presented images of black masculinity that were deemed acceptable. She added, and I'm going to say that hip-hop, rap, and house were not birthed from Jamaican dancehall and sound system culture because the sound systems that were in Jamaica were influenced by the sound systems in the American South that the American Southern DJs use, and Jamaican dancehall actually comes out of hip-hop. I'm going to get to that at the end, and I'm going to break all this down. This is going to be a controversial commentary. I know a lot of people are going to get upset, and a lot of people are going to be happy, but I got to do it. So, moving on, it says, London-based house DJ and record producer Kwame Sappho, known by his stage name as Funk Butcher, said house music has also largely been whitewashed and is often not affiliated with black culture. Homophobia is in a mainstream sense, is a barrier to the commercial viability of a sound. Has impacted house probably greater than any other musical genre because of a lot of the mainstream musical genres are selling something. He said they're selling an image to mainstream audiences. And along with Break My Soul, Drake's new album, Honestly Loving Mine, is also said to have house influences, with more mainstream artists creating house tracks and breaking into the genre. Sonnet said house is being pushed forward and able to have more reach. So, I'm going to pause there because I don't really want to make this long. But the person who wrote this article is jacquelynegermain. I'm not going to solely blame her, but I blame this Kernodle person, the musicology professor, Tammy Kernodle, because I have an issue with you. If you're a musicologist, why are you lying? Why are you lying like this? Musicology are people that study like the history of music, the study of music. I feel, is a paid, you're a paid, misinformative person. You're paid to lie about our history. You see, I'm a person from New York. Most of my subs come from the South, and they come from the Midwest. I don't have a lot of subs that come from like New York, even though I'm a New Yorker. You would think that, but I really don't. The majority of them actually come from the Midwest and the South and California, okay? And many of them have come to me going back as far as 2020, and they want to know, why do people leave out the American influence in hip hop? Why do people feel the need to actually make it so that this genre solely comes from Jamaica and that it originated? And I told all of them, it is because you have to understand the politics post-American civil rights movement and during the Black Power movement towards the end. And you have to understand what was going on in New York City. Okay? My family has been in New York consecutively since 1929. My family, through my great-grandfather, who was Cuban, was here in 1910. But then he went back to Tampa, but he came back in the 20s. But he went to the Bronx. But as consistent, 1929. So, up until the 1970s, Black Americans were completely dominating everything in New York. And yes, you could say throughout the United States, but definitely in New York when it came to the culture, when it came to the music of jazz, of blues, of gospel, of classical. There were a lot of classical artists, operatic artists that were based in New York. Okay. Then in the 1930s and 30s, you had the big bands. You had the battle of the bands, what we know as verses. It comes from those bands. You had like the famous Duke Ellington versus Chick Webb battle, where Billy was singing for Duke and Ella was singing for Chick Webb. Duke won the battle. Chick Webb actually went to court to sue, and supposedly he ended up being the victor, but however, a couple of years later, he passed away due to chronic tuberculosis. Then comes out of the big bands, you have swing. Then you have jitterbug. You have the nouveau jazz, bebop. And then you have, coming out of blues, rhythm and blues, what we call R&B. But because of the artists who actually were white singing R&B, they didn't want to play those race records on the radio, so they changed it to make it appeal to white youth, hence rock and roll. Rock and roll is just white R&B. So that's how you get rock and roll. Country was already there like years, decades ago. That comes out of like the early, like late 1800s, early 1900s. That comes out of bluegrass and stuff like that. And when you get R&B, what happens is, because this is very important, a lot of the DJs coming up in the late 40s, post-World War II, and the 1950s during the Cold War are black. So you start to have the rise of the black stations that cater to blues, jazz, and juke, which is like a form of blues that comes out of Chicago. Then you have what is known as R&B, which blows up. It blows up. It sells millions. What happens in the Deep South is that the airwaves are picked up to where if you are living in Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, Cayman Islands, Bermuda, Cuba, Jamaica, and Hispaniola, you will pick up on the sounds, which is why many Jamaican, and let's not forget Central America too, which is why many people from those places have an affinity for country music, particularly Jamaicans and people from like Belize. They love country music, but Jamaicans more so loved R&B. So what happened was they, from the island itself, started to study the sound system and how it operated. There was a famous DJ. His name, I want to get it, the pronunciation right. His name is Jacquelynegermain. I think it's Jacquelynegermain. Okay? He basically is the father of the two-system turntable that we use in hip-hop today. It was originated from him. And he ended up going to Jamaica and visiting Jamaica and pretty much hosting events there. Because pre-1980s, 1990s, as a whole, American blacks and Jamaican blacks did get along. This is stuff that you hear about. It comes out of New York, okay? And I'm going to say that for another topic later. What happens is bringing the system down there, it changes the music, because what was going on before, Jamaicans made they was really known for making something called mento, and mento was really good, but it's more folklorish, but it's really a good music. You might have heard somebody named Louise Bennett. She's like the mother and queen of mento, very famous lady. It's really good, but mento never blew up internationally like calypso did, okay? So, going back, there was a song that blew up in the late 50s called Blueberry Hill by Antoine Dominique Domino, better known as Fats Domino. And Fats Domino, who I want to make clear, from his father's ancestors, like 5th or 6th generation, there was a Haitian ancestor, but he himself is not Haitian. Most of him is being foundational Black American, okay? He never brags about Haitian roots because only 100K went from Haiti to Louisiana. There were millions and millions of Black foundational Black Americans in Louisiana because I'm one of those descendants, okay? So that's a whole nother thing. But they took a beat in Jamaica. They took the beat from Blueberry Hill. Dun 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 dun, and stretched it out and used that as a basis of what is known as reggae. So the foundation of reggae comes from R&B and rock and roll, because Blueberry Hill, believe it or not, leans more to white music, but it also has a slight influence on a genre that's very famous in Louisiana called Zydeco, okay? Like if you hear some of like the piano playing in the background and like some of the horns, it got a Zydeco beat to it, all right? That's that Louisiana sound, which is foundational Black American culture. They took that and made that the basis of reggae. Now, that doesn't mean, I want to keep this in mind, that every reggae song is, off the rip, oh, it's American. No. But the heart and soul of reggae is FBA created music, all right? Now, why I'm saying this, because I want everybody to understand how this whole myth of Jamaicans created hip hop came about. In the 60s, Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, okay? And I believe the other man's name is Bunny Wailer, okay? Hopefully I got the name right. They had a trio, okay? And they were making music. Before they were making reggae music, their music, they were really influenced by the Motown sound, okay? They were making Motown influenced music. They were making music that was even influenced by Stax, out in Tennessee. But their music never really picked up because the record labels looked at them as mimicking the R&B male groups in America in the 1960s. So by the late 60s, they switched up their musical style and went into reggae. But their reggae was different, more so from the original reggae, because the original reggae is more still, when you listen to it, if you listen to Desmond Decker, okay, the song The Israelites, that reggae record is more leaning towards the R&B side of reggae. Whereas Bob Marley, his sound was more rock and roll, which is why white people love it, because he basically slowed down the rhythm. He slowed it down even more so and used more of the drum and influence, but he also used a lot of guitar. Whereas the earliest ones was a little bit faster and you could bop and dance to it. That's the reason why white people have an affinity for Bob Marley. And when they think of reggae, they think of him, but they don't think of Desmond Decker. And I think that's really foul. I want to make that clear. However, approaching the 70s in America, when black people were getting their rights, there was the beginning of excluding us out of the picture. There were people who were white basically saying, okay, you got your rights now, you got what you wanted, but as a culture, we're trying to erase you all. So it was going on by the 1970s. So this is when you have the replacement. The replacement theory that these white people are talking about, they're getting that from us. They've been trying to replace us from the late 60s, 1970s. So this is how you start having different immigration groups coming in, which, to be fair, black civil rights leaders were the ones that advocated it. Okay? From, I believe the act is called the Hatch-Seller Act. I believe that's what it is. But it's an amendment to the 1965 Immigration Act because people were tired of racist white people coming into this country and nobody wanted to deal with it. So they started bringing people of color, black people, Latinos, Asians coming in around 1967. But they would really bring a lot of people in to replace us. So what happens is you start to see, in particularly New York, where you can't even get loans. You can't even get into certain places. You couldn't even get certain jobs. So they were hiring black people, but they were not hiring black people like us, like my people, so to speak. So this is how this whole thing comes about. Now we are in 1970, and there's a kid named Disco King Mario, and he's born in Durham, North Carolina in 1966, but he immigrates at the age of 7 to the Bronx. And he's DJing, and he's basically influenced by American DJs, okay? So what happens is he starts playing like Pygmy Markham records. He starts playing all these spoken word records because spoken word, i.e. rap, actually comes from paying homage to A$AP Brown out in California. California was rapping for years, okay? That's a whole nother topic to talk about. This is where the real truth of the East Coast, West Coast beat really comes about. That's why California don't really like New York rappers and New York hip hop artists. They will never pay homage to y'all. So what comes about is Disco Mario King starts in the 1970s, particularly 77, when he starts mentoring young kids as DJs coming up. And it was all fun. And one of those people that he starts mentoring is Africa Bambaataa. But he also, for a while, mentors Cool DJ Herc. He mentors him. Okay? And what happens is you have other DJs besides him that come into the fold. But he's the most big star of them all at this time. And what happens is that by 73, 74, particularly at that time when James Brown music is really popular with the song The Big Payback, everybody is into, this new thing with DJing and mixing, okay? Mario was known for mixing records going back to 1969 when he was 13, 1970 when he was 14. And he was also breaking the beat. He was also doing all those things, okay? What it was with Kool Herc, he was doing it different. Where he was basically, from what I've read, he was basically breaking the beat to where he was pausing the beat and then overlapping other songs. Mario did his a little different. Now, I'm going to say this. We as foundational Black Americans don't have an issue with DJ Kool Herc because DJ Kool Herc has never said out of his mouth that he created hip hop, and he never said that it came from Jamaica. Do we consider him one of the pioneers? Yeah, we consider him because he brought something original that is used today, but it does not mean that it came from hip hop and that he is a creator of hip hop. No one person created hip hop. I want to make this clear. Hip hop is basically like gumbo. It's pretty much an additive and a culmination of R&B and funk. but it's mainly funk. It's basically using other people's music to do mixes and add other people's verses onto a song. That's why sampling is very big in hip hop, because that's what they was doing. They was playing other records. The creative side starts to come around the late 70s, okay? There's nothing wrong with it, which is why many musical, scientists, musicologists frown upon hip hop, because it's not an originator genre of music like classical music, like jazz music, like rock and roll, like R&B, like country. It's other people's music that you use to basically as the backbone of other people using lyrics or even singing and doing lyricism as well. Here's where the discrepancy comes in line. In the late 70s, you had gatekeepers coming in. The gatekeepers were basically black, but they were used as tools by white people to basically say, listen, we gonna change how this is all done. We only want people coming up from hip hop as DJs who are mainly Jamaican. But if they come from other Caribbean islands, we'll take them as well. But we don't want anybody who's American black descent being known as a DJ, because what we want to do is we want to make this genre slowly as though it was created by them and it came from Jamaica. These are known facts. There are DJs online who were there in the early 70s, who were doing mixes, who were doing shows. And by the late 70s, they couldn't get any jobs. They were cut out of the market of what is known as hip hop. Now, here's the funny thing about all of this. If you created, let's say, if Jamaicans created hip hop, right? How come, listen to this, how come the word and term hip hop was never used until the early 1980s by Cowboy from Furious 5, whose friend was in the army, and he would say hip hop while they were doing the marches and drills. That is where the word hip hop comes from. And that's hip hop, that's American, United States. So that right there in itself tells you it's American. Because if it came from hip hop, if hip hop came from Jamaica, how come they never called it hip hop in the 1970s? When they were writing about these DJs in the paper and in the press, they never would say, oh, this musical genre. When they were interviewing all those DJs, when they were interviewing Kool Herc, when they were interviewing Joseph Sadler, a.k.a. Grandmaster Flash, when they were even interviewing the young one, Africa Bambaataa, they never said the word hip-hop. You don't hear the term hip-hop until you get into the early 80s, okay? And I'm talking about 81, 82. 83. By 83, you hear it known, classified as hip hop. You want to know what they called it? Disco beats. And where does disco come from? Who is the godfather of disco? Barry White from Los Angeles, California, by way of Texas. Okay? By way of Texas. Now you understanding why the West Coast will never ever pay homage to New York rap hip hop? And yes, it is true. You have hip hoppers. I hate the term hip hop. You have a lot of the early hip hop artists coming out of New York that have West Indian backgrounds. And this is no shade. And I want to make this clear. There's no shade. I would never degrade anyone from any part of the world or heritage. I want to make that clear because I'm not doing that. But what I am saying is the original people who were in hip hop in the 70s, who were American, tell these stories that they were locked out. They could not get jobs. They would go and, apply to work for different clubs, and the club managers and owners was like, listen, if we going to break these records, and if I'm going to get paid for this and have these artists come here because these record labels are paying me, I can't have you here. And who would show up? The people like Grandmaster Flash, the people like Kool Herc, the people like African Bambaataa, and other DJs of Caribbean heritage. Because it was the powers that be that wanted it that way. Because I had mentioned earlier, they wanted to make this a genre that came out of Jamaica, West Indies, okay? Not Jamaica, New York, all right? And many of them, up until the early 2010s, they were silenced. They couldn't even talk. They had to get regular jobs. Now, going to the 80s, it is true, as I mentioned, but think of all the other people that were locked out, even as rappers. The first rapper that you have come up is Curtis Blow. Now, from what I've been told, Curtis Blow does have an American background, but Curtis Blow never blew up as big as he should have, and that man was talented. The first ones that really came through was Run DMC. Even though DMC has a Dominican mother, he has a Black American father. The others were American, but here's the thing. They had a connection with Russell Simmons because Russell Simmons was connected to powerful white people. That's how they were able to sustain themselves and to live by themselves. And that's like the beginning of the change you see. And LL Cool J, what got him through was because he was very talented, but he was heavily promoted because he was down with Def Jam. And they would say that he had a West Indian grandfather from Barbados, which he clarified later on that it was his grandfather through his marriage to his maternal grandmother. But he took him as a grandfather. There's no shade in that. Families are families. But in New York, in the late 70s, mid 70s, early 80s, it's this whole thing where you see a lot of them have this heritage as such, okay? It doesn't really start to clearly change until the early 90s. And it's the rise of the West Coast rappers coming out of New York, out of California, where you see the change. Because here's the thing. The rappers out in New York, they didn't really sell a lot of records. They didn't go platinum like that, except for LL Cool J, except for Run DMC. They didn't go platinum like that. But easily they went platinum out of California because there was something that they had over us out in New York. Cooperative economics. Them people, they had each other's back. DOC from Dallas. He went out to California. He went platinum. NWA, they went 3 times platinum within a year. And they never had a top 40 hit at that time. All them other West Coast rappers blew up. And the biggest to come out there is MC Hammer. Because after his first album, he went diamond. The first rapper to do it. Because out in the Midwest and even out West, they look out for each other. See, in New York, because of what was going down at that time, where I'm going to lock you out because you're not from this place, not from that place, they shitted on them. They didn't support them. And after a while, they dropped them. They had to get regular jobs, hustle for gigs. We've never had a supportive unit in New York hip hop. We've never had that in the pioneering stages of the 70s and 80s. It wasn't until the 90s where you start seeing that real camaraderie. Because by that time, it's mainstreaming and you don't have to have like this gatekeeper shit where, hey, is you talented? Sign this and you can get a deal. We don't care where you come from. It is what it is. We ain't blocking you. We trying to make money and hustle. And the pioneers, i.e., they're very bitter about that. They're very bitter. Kool Herc never had a record deal. Matter of fact, there were years when he was on crack. In the 80s, he was on crack. By like the mid to late 80s, he was on crack. African Bambaataa went to Europe, and we know what he was doing. We ain't going to say it. Grandmaster Flash was the only one that was still around, but after a while, he wasn't getting gigs. They were has-beens, so to speak. And nothing shady towards them, but what was going on is that you had a new crowd coming up where it was based on talent. And they got all the credit. And a lot of it has to do with the old school ones benefited from that closure, and nobody really wants to fuck with it. There are families that are hurt in New York who were connected to the earliest of hip hop. They are hurt. If you mention certain DJs, it's not the artist they got an issue with, it's the DJs. If you mention certain DJs, they will tell you, don't you ever mention that mother effer to me. Don't you ever mention it. You will see them like throw shit because I've witnessed it. And I witnessed it on her 25th, the Bronx. I could tell, I have stories where I'm like, okay, all right. I didn't mean no harm. I didn't know you worked with them and had a bad experience. Like, don't you mention it. I'm not mad at you, but it takes me back to a place. They have PTSD from this. So it's bad. Now I'm going to talk about dance hall. I love dance hall. Okay? But here's the thing about dance hall. Dance hall is influenced by hip hop. Dance hall comes about in the 70s. And we're talking about mid to late 70s. Dance hall, believe it or not, has influence from disco. Dance hall has that. And I want to say something that people are probably going to be mad at me over. There was a group called the Welfare Poets that came out the Bronx, and they were predominantly Puerto Rican and Cuban. And they were spoken word artists, and they had some really good songs. They had a song about the ghetto and poverty, things like that. They're very upset because they feel as though they too played a part in pioneering hip hop, and they also got cut out. And this is where it comes about with the Puerto Ricans and Latinos in create hip hop, controversy. I'm going to talk about that also, because there is a lot of contention between Puerto Ricans and the label and who they label as the founder of hip hop, because they really feel that they were excluded. I'm going to talk about that at another bit. But I want to get back to the dance hall. Dance hall was influenced by hip hop. Hip hop didn't come out of dance hall. Dance hall was influenced by hip hop. It's also influenced by disco. But it's not like the flashy disco, but more of like the subdued disco that you start seeing later on by the mid to late 70s. And it's a dance music, so to speak. I love dance hall, but we can't lie about the origins of things. I like reggae, but we can't lie about where things come from. This is why I wanted to do this on this topic. The woman who made this, I looked her up. I'm going to say something about this. She is LGBT, believe it or not. And her focus is more on women in music. I believe Tammy Kernodle doesn't really know what she was speaking of. And she's a musicologist, and she's also a musician. And she pretty much is a person who's been doing this since the 80s. But a lot of these people come out of these schools and universities and think tanks where they have to state things to keep their jobs. I am angry at her because I believe she's FBA, and you're making us as a culture lose our, I don't want to say place, but our what's the best word? Our rightful stance in what we created. And you're taking it away. And it's wrong. You're taking it away and you're helping it give it to someone else. Now, I believe based on looking at her, she probably has issues with Black American men. So she probably believes in, the other group is nicer than this one I dealt with for years. I'm just going to come out and say it. Okay? And this is the other things too, because Tariq Nasheed really brings this out. And he says, a lot of LGBT people who are Black, they don't like Black people. They have like the disdain against Blackness in America, American Blackness. And that's why I had to look at it and say, well, let me look her up. Because I said she's either not from here or she's LGBT. Nothing against LGBT. I want to make that clear. But a lot of the LGBT people that they propagate, they usually have issues with American Blacks and American Blackness. So I want to make that, known. So I'm going to wrap it up here because I've been talking for almost an hour. this topic really means a lot to me. I really didn't think I was going to get a chance to say what I have to say. But the author really didn't fact check what they were saying and what they wrote. They shouldn't have put that in there. They should have just left that out, because now everybody going to come at this woman, jacquelynegermain. And I want to say something. CNN is fake news as it is. I can't stand CNN. I think they're full of baloney, because a year ago, they basically said that this African drummer who passed away, and he was from Nigeria, they said he was the heartbeat of the civil rights movement. Nobody ever heard of this man. And this is why I said earlier, if we don't start gatekeeping our culture and promoting the truth of it, they'll basically say that Martin Luther King was a black man from Suriname. And I'm being honest. They will start saying stuff like that. Then there's a very important song that I love him as a rapper. I say that he's the precursor to Kendrick Lamar. Wasulu. I can't think of his name. Wasulu. If you always say you are, he's from Chicago. He basically said that, Eminem would be a black guy. The Jackson 5, they'll be white kids. If you don't own the truth, you will basically end up with everything not just being whitewashed, will be erased. Because I think we focus on whitewashing, but we don't focus on erasure. Lupe Fiasco, that's who it is. He's the one in the song. He basically said, it's a song, you can all black everything. That's the record. I know I'm probably long-winded and I spoke, but I'm going to end this here. I want to know what you basically think of this. I know it's going to be controversial. I know I'm going to rub people the wrong way. I know some people are going to love me for this. I know some people are going to, just despise me for this. But I want to hear what you have to say. I want to read your comments. Share. Hit the notification bell. And if you haven't, please subscribe. And with that being said, I am signing off and signing out. Thank you. I'll be back shortly with another commentary. And thank you for listening. And have a wonderful weekend.